I cracked my knuckles for the millionth time. I knew better than to make deals without knowing the cost, especially with hoodoo priestesses. But what choice did I have? I crossed and uncrossed my legs and smoothed my champagne silk crepe dress. Baker gave me a sympathetic smile before looking back toward the cemetery gates. We were perched on the concrete edge of a planter, waiting for someone, or something, to let me inside. It was impossible to ignore the dry stickiness of my mouth. I just wanted to go home.
No matter what they want, do not agree to start tonight. Make sure you have time to plan,
Baker said for the 5th time, his lips barely moving. Apparently nerves were catching. I studied the profile of the ginger-haired shifter beside me. Baker's nose had a slight notch in it, like he'd been in too many fights. Crease lines behind his eyes hinted to his gregarious personality, and his full lips were set in an unnaturally serious line. I realized I didn't really know much about Baker, other than he talked like he was plucked from a fast-talking 40s movie like His Girl Friday. How old are you? The corner of Baker's mouth twitched.
Next, you're gonna ask me if I really look like this.
Do you? Though I had no trouble remembering my past anymore, I'd never knowingly had any contact with a shifter. But that didn't mean they weren't in my life. They could be anything or anyone, even someone I knew and had loved for decades. My heart clenched. Jaren's name whispered through my mind like a forbidden fruit. I hadn't allowed myself to think about him. I couldn't. It wasn't fair to Cheney, and I had responsibilities. But the name was enough to trigger the memory. The image of life draining from Jaren's eyes filled my mind. My breath caught and I clenched my hands together. His eyes had never strayed from mine as I killed him. I could still feel the warmth of his body and the sensation of his blood pouring over my hands. I looked at my laced fingers like they were someone else's. The stains of his blood weren't visible, but they would always be there all the same. There had been a time when it was hard to tell where Jaren ended and I began. Now he was gone. Because of me. No, don't fall apart now. You did what you had to do, it's not your fault. But the reasonable voice in my mind could no longer hold back the swell of emotion that had been ignored too long.
Maybe someday, when I've known you for longer than 5 seconds, I'll tell you.
Baker turned his whole body toward me.
Hey, doll, you okay? You don't look so good.
I blinked several times and dug my fingernails into my palms, trying not to feel the knife sinking into Jaren's flesh or the scorching heat of his blood. I swear I had to. The moaning creak of the gate swinging open by itself barely registered over the roar of my blood rushing through my veins. Baker stood up and offered me his hand.
It's time.
His words flushed all thoughts from my head. Everything was quiet and time almost stopped as I looked at the hand waiting to lead me back into uncertainty. No time for a breakdown. I would think about Jaren later.
Selene?
Yeah? I took Baker's strong hand and stood up, knees wobbling. When I was steady enough, he let me go and nodded toward the gate. I took a couple steps, but Baker didn't follow. Aren't you coming? He shook his head.
This is one walk you have to take alone.
I blew out a long breath and glanced back at the wrought iron gate. Its scrolling pattern slithered as if alive. I shook my head and closed my eyes. Not possible. But even on my second look, the gate was fluid, as if the iron had turned to liquid and was pumping through unseen veins. Are you kidding? I asked Baker.